It all started with little things. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Kelly had been acting off lately, but hey, everyone goes through phases, right? I tried not to read too much into it. I figured she was just stressed, maybe overwhelmed with work, or hitting one of those midlife crisis points people always joke about. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. And once you start seeing the cracks, you can't stop looking for more. She started spending way more time on her phone. She used to be the kind of person who'd forget where she left it half the time, but now, it was glued to her hand, even during dinner. She'd tilt the screen away if I glanced her way, texting someone with that little smile on her face, the one that used to be reserved just for me. You know that feeling when your gut tells you something's off? Yeah, that. Her late nights at work started piling up too. Just another meeting, she'd say. Deadlines are insane this month. And because I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, I let it slide. But the way she suddenly started caring so much about her appearance, that hit me harder. Kelly was always effortlessly beautiful to me, but she began wearing makeup every day, dressing sharper, smelling different. One night, I hugged her when she came home, and there it was, this scent I'd never smelled before. It wasn't her usual perfume. This was something new, and it didn't belong to us. I tried not to jump to conclusions. People change, right? Maybe she wanted to feel good about herself again. So I told myself she was just going through something personal, and I shouldn't make it about me. But I wasn't stupid. When things stop adding up, you start doing the math. One night, I couldn't help myself. She left her phone on the kitchen counter, just sitting there, daring me to take a peek. I knew it was wrong, but hell, I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed answers. I clicked open the screen, and there it was, messages from some guy named John. The most recent one was burned into my brain. I miss you. Can't wait to see you again. My heart dropped. My first thought? Maybe it's innocent. Maybe this John guy is just a friend. But come on, who says I miss you like that unless there's more going on? And the worst part? I realized how distant she'd become with me. Our conversations felt forced. She didn't laugh at my dumb jokes the way she used to, and the intimacy, that had all but vanished. We hadn't had sex in weeks, and even when we did, it felt mechanical. Like she was just going through the motions to keep me off her back. I knew I needed to talk to her, but every time I tried, she shut me down. I'm tired, Joe, she'd say, brushing past me like I was a nuisance. Or worse, she'd act like I was being paranoid. Why are you always so suspicious? Can't a woman just have a rough week without getting the third degree? And damn it, I believed her. Or at least, I wanted to. But that night with the perfume and the message from John, that was the turning point. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together how we'd ended up here. I kept telling myself it was just a phase. Maybe she was bored, or maybe the stress was getting to her. I tried every excuse in the book, anything to convince myself that it wasn't what I feared. Then came the night that shattered whatever hope I had left. I decided to surprise her by picking her up from work, just a little gesture to show I still cared. She hadn't asked for it, but I figured it might remind her that I was still here, still trying. I waited outside her office for over an hour, but she never showed. I checked my phone, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood her schedule. That's when I got the bright idea to check the nearby restaurants. Maybe she had grabbed dinner with coworkers or something. I found her, all right, just not how I imagined. There she was, sitting outside on the patio of this cozy little bistro, holding hands with a man I'd never seen before. He had that smug, polished look, slick back hair, a pressed shirt, and that confident grin that made me want to break his jaw. And Kelly? She was laughing in a way I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the forced chuckle she gave me when I tried to make her smile. It was genuine. I stood frozen on the other side of the street, heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to march over there and cause a scene, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the fear of what I'd confirm if I did. Maybe I just wanted one last look at the woman I thought I knew before everything came crashing down. They didn't see me. Hell, they didn't even glance around like they had anything to hide. They were too wrapped up in each other, lost in whatever fantasy they were living. I watched them for what felt like an eternity, every second twisting the knife a little deeper. At some point, John leaned in and kissed her hand, and she blushed. Blushed like a damn schoolgirl. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands were shaking. and my mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. Anger, betrayal, sadness. But above all, I felt stupid. How had I let it get this far without seeing it? How many nights had she lied straight to my face while she was with him? I drove home that night in silence, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. When I got back, the house felt colder than ever. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the walls, replaying every conversation, every lie, every time she said she was working late. And for the first time, I let myself admit it. Kelly was cheating on me. It was like the ground had been ripped out from under me. The woman I'd built my life with, the one I trusted more than anyone, was sneaking around behind my back with some other guy. I wasn't even angry yet, just numb, like my mind couldn't process it all at once. The next morning, she came home late again, smiling like nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, that fake little peck she perfected, and asked if I'd eaten dinner. I stared at her, wondering how the hell she could be so casual after what I'd seen. Long day? I asked, my voice barely steady. Yeah, she said, kicking off her shoes. Exhausting. And that was it. No guilt, no shame, just lies wrapped in a sweet smile. As she walked away, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever love we'd once shared was gone, and I had no idea what I was going to do next. But one thing was clear. I wasn't about to let her get away with this. Not without a fight. I knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Not after seeing Kelly with John, all smiles and sweet touches. But the thing about betrayal? It eats away at you. It doesn't let you sleep, doesn't let you think straight. You become obsessed with the unanswered questions. How long had this been going on? How many times had she looked me in the eye, kissed me goodbye, only to go straight to him? That night, as she lay next to me, peacefully asleep like she had no care in the world, I couldn't resist anymore. Her phone was right there on the nightstand, screen dim but unlocked. My hands shook as I reached for it, but I had to know. I had to see the truth, no matter how ugly it was. I swiped through her messages, and there they were, dozens of texts from John. It wasn't just flirty banter or quick exchanges. No, these were full conversations, filled with inside jokes, I love you-s, and explicit messages about what they did when they were together. There were photos too, selfies from hotel rooms, shots of their meals, even one of them shirtless in bed. The timestamps told me everything I needed to know. While I thought she was on business trips, she was with him. When I was home alone with the kids, she was wrapped around him in some hotel room. It felt like someone had ripped my heart out and stomped on it. My hands clenched the phone so tight I thought I might crush it. I sat there in the dark, the glow of the screen reflecting the end of my marriage, and I knew this wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. She had been living a double life. The next morning, I couldn't keep it in any longer. As she was sipping her coffee at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened, I laid the phone down in front of her. Care to explain these? I asked, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. She glanced at the screen, her face going pale for a moment, but then she quickly put on that defensive mask. What the hell, Joe? You went through my phone? Yeah, Kelly, I did. And guess what? I found all the proof I needed. She tried to play it cool, brushing it off like it wasn't a big deal. It's not what it looks like. You're overreacting. Overreacting? I laughed bitterly. Explain the hotels, the photos, the I love yous. Explain how this isn't exactly what it looks like. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing she was cornered. After a long pause, she exhaled sharply, like I was the one being unreasonable. Fine. You want the truth? Yes. I've been seeing John. But let's not act like this marriage hasn't been falling apart for years, Joe. You knew it. You just didn't want to admit it. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So, this is my fault now? You cheat on me, and somehow I'm the bad guy. I'm not saying it's all on you, she snapped. But you haven't exactly been present, have you? We stopped being happy a long time ago, Joe. I needed something else. Something else. That's what I had become. Something to be replaced, discarded when she got bored. And what about the kids, Kelly? Did they stop matching too? Her face twisted in frustration. Don't you dare bring them into this. This is between us. The conversation spiraled from there, with me demanding answers she couldn't or wouldn't give. Every word out of her mouth felt like another dagger. And then she said the thing that shattered whatever was left of my heart. I don't love you anymore, Joe. I haven't for a long time. I was just waiting for the right moment to tell you. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, numb, while she calmly picked up her coffee and took another sip, like she hadn't just dropped a bomb on my entire world. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually I found my voice. I'm leaving. She didn't flinch. That's probably for the best. The casualness of her response enraged me. That's it? That's all you have to say? She sighed, as if my pain was an inconvenience to her. Look, maybe it's better if you stay with your mom for a while. Give me some space. It'll be easier for the kids if we don't drag them into this mess right now. I stared at her, wondering how the hell we had ended up here. I thought back to all the years we'd spent together, the plans we'd made, the promises we'd shared. It felt like a cruel joke, like I'd been living in some fantasy, and she had been waiting to wake me up with this nightmare. I packed a bag without saying another word. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay. I glanced at the family photos on the wall as I walked out the door, wondering how many of them had been taken while she was already cheating. Driving away from the house, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. It was like the life I had built was crumbling around me, and all I could do was watch it collapse. I ended up at my mom's house, sitting at her kitchen table, trying to explain what had happened. She hugged me, told me everything would be okay, but we both knew that wasn't true. Nothing about this was okay. Over the next few days, I tried to wrap my head around the idea of divorce. I knew it was coming. There was no way back from what Kelly had done. But every time I thought about it, I felt overwhelmed. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing the future we had planned, the life we had built. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every fight, every lie, every time she said she loved me. And I kept asking myself the same question. How could she do this to me? The thought of lawyers and paperwork made me sick. The idea of dividing everything we owned, of explaining this mess to the kids, felt impossible. I wasn't ready to let go, but I knew I didn't have a choice. One thing was clear. The man I had been, the trusting husband, the devoted father, was gone. And in his place was someone I didn't recognize. Someone angry, bitter, and determined not to be a fool again. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of the man I used to be. The thing about divorce is that it doesn't just end a marriage, it guts you. Every conversation becomes a negotiation, every memory a weapon, every promise broken. I knew exactly what was waiting for me if I went through with it. Endless fights over the house, the kids, the money, lawyers bleeding me dry, and Kelly playing the victim. I'd be lucky to come out the other side with half of what I'd worked for. And even if I did, I knew I'd never escape her shadow. She'd always be there, a constant reminder of what I lost. That's when it hit me. Why not just disappear? It sounds crazy, I know, but the idea started small and kept growing, gnawing at me like a lifeline. What if I could just leave it all behind? No divorce, no splitting up assets, no fights, just a clean break. People always talk about starting fresh, but the truth is, you can't really start over unless you're willing to burn it all down. I spent weeks planning every detail. If I was going to do this, there could be no loose ends. I couldn't have people looking for me or suspecting anything. I had to make them believe I was gone for good. So I dug out the old boat my dad left me. A small, rickety thing, but it would do the job. I found my birth certificate, passport, and phone and left them on board, making it look like I had taken them with me for one final trip. The hardest part was writing the note. I sat at the kitchen table with a bottle of whiskey, staring at the paper, trying to find the right words. How do you write your own goodbye? Eventually, I scribbled out something that sounded tragic enough. I'm sorry for everything. I couldn't keep pretending anymore. I failed as a husband, and there's nothing left for me here. It was vague, but vague was good. People would fill in the blanks with their own ideas. They'd think it was the weight of the affair, or maybe the guilt, or just life beating me down. That was the beauty of it. Everyone would assume what they wanted, and no one would look deeper. The night I disappeared, I sailed the boat out just far enough to be believable, but not so far that it wouldn't be found. I made sure to drop my phone and papers where they'd be obvious. Right on the deck, next to a half-empty bottle of whiskey. The Coast Guard would find it and assume the worst. They'd say I went overboard, probably drunk and heartbroken. No one would bother looking for a body. Hell, even Kelly would probably be relieved. I stood at the edge of the boat, staring at the dark, cold water below. I thought about everything I was leaving behind, my kids, my friends, the life I had known. But the truth was, that life had already ended the moment I found out about Kelly and John. This wasn't running away. This was cutting the last thread, holding me to a world that didn't want me anymore. With one deep breath, I jumped. The cold hit me like a fist, stealing the air from my lungs, but I didn't fight it. I let the water swallow me, pulling me under, carrying me away from everything I used to be. Somehow, I made it to shore that night, gasping and shivering like a drowned rat. I'd stashed a duffel bag there earlier, dry clothes, a little cash, and a fake ID I'd picked up from a guy I knew in my 20s. My new name was Michael. Just Michael. Simple. Forgettable. The kind of name no one would remember. I hitchhiked to the nearest town, then caught a bus to a place so far off the map it might as well not exist. It was a small town, the kind where people don't ask too many questions as long as you pay your rent on time. I rented a small, one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. No memories, no ghosts. Just a clean slate. At first, it felt strange, waking up with no one expecting anything from me. No emails, no calls, no arguments waiting to happen. Just silence. I found work with a local construction crew, swinging hammers and hauling lumber. It was hard, dirty work, but it felt good, honest, even after years of feeling useless. It was a relief to build something with my own hands, even if it was just another guy's house. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Slowly, I started to feel normal. I was just Michael now. No history, no baggage. I kept my head down, paid my bills, and stayed off the radar. The people in town were friendly enough, but I didn't let anyone get too close. It was easier that way, safer. But every now and then, the past would sneak up on me. I'd catch myself wondering what Kelly told the kids. Did she pretend to be heartbroken? Did she tell them the truth about John, or spin some sob story to make herself look like the victim? Part of me wanted to know, but the smarter part knew that digging into it would only hurt more. What was done was done. Still, at night, when the town was quiet and the only sound was the hum of the fridge, I'd think about them, my kids, mostly. I hoped they were okay. I told myself they'd be better off without me, that Kelly would figure things out, that life would go on. But the truth was, I missed them like hell. I'd traded one kind of prison for another, and some nights, I wasn't sure if I'd made the right choice. But every time I thought about going back, about calling, about letting them know I was still alive, I'd remember that look on Kelly's face when she told me she didn't love me anymore. The way she dismissed me like I was nothing. And I knew I could never go back to that life, no matter how much it hurt to stay away. This was my life now, a new name, a new job, and no past. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I wasn't Joe, the betrayed husband, or the failure Kelly made me out to be. I was just Michael, a guy trying to make it one day at a time. And that was enough. For now. Life didn't give me much, but at least it gave me Alice. I met her about a year after I arrived in this nowhere town, just as the numbness of starting over was settling into routine. She was a yoga instructor of all things. Not exactly someone I thought I'd cross paths with, much less start a relationship. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Alice was different. She didn't ask a lot of questions, which was perfect for me. She had her own mess to deal with, a nasty divorce, a string of bad relationships, and a brother she barely spoke to anymore. I could tell she had some demons, but she wore them lightly, like she'd made peace with them, or at least learned how to keep them at arm's length. We met at a local cafe after a class she was teaching let out. I was grabbing coffee, and she came up behind me in line, complaining about how someone stole her parking spot. I made a joke about small-town dramas, and she laughed, really laughed. It was the kind of laugh that makes you feel like maybe things aren't as bad as you thought. Before I knew it, we were sitting at a table, talking like old friends. Our relationship didn't move fast. In fact, it took months before we even went on a proper date. I liked that about Alice. She wasn't in a rush, and neither was I. After everything I'd been through with Kelly, the idea of jumping into something new scared the hell out of me. But Alice? She didn't push. She let me come to her in my own time. She had this calming presence, like she'd been through her own version of hell and came out the other side a little bruised, but not broken. For the first time in years, I started to feel something close to peace. I didn't have to pretend to be anyone with her. She didn't know about Joe, the man who faked his death to escape a failed marriage. To her, I was just Michael, a guy with a quiet past and a new start. And for once, that was enough. Things were good with Alice. Not perfect, but good. We spent weekends hiking, cooking, or just lying around talking about nothing. She made life feel lighter, like maybe, just maybe, I could leave all the old ghosts behind. And for a while, I believed I could. But life is a way of dragging the past back when you least expect it. It was an ordinary Tuesday when I saw her. I was at the local supermarket, picking up groceries, eggs, milk, bread, the usual. And there she was, Kelly, the woman who had shattered my life into pieces, standing in the cereal aisle, casually debating between two brands of granola. At first, I thought I was seeing things. It had been years since I'd left. I figured she'd moved on, stayed in the city, and kept living the life she'd chosen with John. But there she was right in front of me, and my heart damn near stopped. She looked different, older maybe, or just worn down. But it was her, no doubt about it. Before I could slip away unnoticed, a voice cut through the air. "Kelly, come on, we gotta go." And there he was, John, the man who had taken everything from me, standing right next to her, holding a shopping basket and looking just as miserable as she did. I stood there, frozen, watching them bicker about groceries like any ordinary couple. But they weren't ordinary to me. They were the reason I was here, living under a fake name, trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of what they destroyed. I managed to slip out of the aisle without them noticing, my heart pounding in my chest. I should have felt anger. I should have wanted to confront them, scream in their faces, tell them what they'd done to me. But all I felt was cold, detached, like I was watching a bad movie play out in real life. Over the next few weeks, I kept an eye on them. I wasn't proud of it, but I couldn't help myself. They were in my town now, right under my nose, and I needed to know what the hell they were doing here. It didn't take long to figure out that things weren't going well for them. I'd catch glimpses of them around town, fighting outside their car, arguing at the hardware store, John storming off while Kelly stood there, arms crossed, looking exhausted. I overheard bits and pieces of conversations when I passed them in public. They were in trouble, financial trouble, from the sounds of it. John had lost his job, and they were barely scraping by. They'd moved here for a fresh start, just like I had, but it was clear things were already falling apart. A part of me wanted to feel satisfaction. After all, this was karma, wasn't it? The life they'd built on lies and betrayal was crumbling right before my eyes. But another part of me just felt empty, like even their downfall couldn't fill the hole they'd left in me. I watched them from the shadows, never revealing myself. I didn't know what I was waiting for exactly. Maybe I just needed to see it for myself, to see that they weren't living the perfect life I'd imagined in my darkest moments. Every fight, every bitter exchange between them felt like a small victory. It was petty, I know, but it was something, proof that they hadn't escaped unscathed, proof that their happily ever after was as much of a lie as our marriage had been. Alice noticed something was off with me during those weeks. She'd ask if everything was okay, if something was bothering me. I'd just smile and say I was fine, but I wasn't. Seeing Kelly and John again stirred up things I thought I'd buried. Anger, resentment, regret. It was like all the progress I'd made with Alice was unraveling the moment they re-entered my orbit. But I couldn't tell her. How do you explain to someone that your ex-wife, the one who thought you were dead, is now living down the street? How do you confess that you've been watching her from the sidelines, waiting for her life to fall apart? I told myself I wasn't hurting anyone. I wasn't interfering. I was just observing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. I wasn't just watching. I was waiting for the moment when everything came crashing down. Watching Kelly and John's life unravel from a distance wasn't enough. It scratched the itch, sure, but the anger that simmered beneath the surface demanded more. I wanted them to feel the same despair they had put me through. Watching wasn't going to cut it. I needed to pull some strings, and I knew exactly where to start. It wasn't hard to dig up dirt on John. He wasn't the brightest bulb, and people in small towns love to talk. A few subtle conversations at the local bar, a quick search through public records, and I had more than enough material to work with. I found out that he had landed a corporate job after they moved here. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep them afloat. And from what I gathered, his position was precarious. I started small, anonymous letters to John's employer, hinting at misconduct. They weren't elaborate lies, just carefully crafted truths twisted to look worse than they were. I wrote about rumors of his drinking problem and included vague suggestions that he had been involved in questionable business practices back in the city. Nothing solid,